the quiet spark of kindness. The morning sun touched the streets of Los Angeles, warm and quiet. A soft breeze moved through the palm trees outside a small studio where cameras were already being set up. Keanu Reeves sat in a corner sipping coffee quietly. He never liked the attention. Even after decades in Hollywood, fame still felt like something heavy on his shoulders. It never really fit him. Sandra Bullock walked in, wearing a simple white shirt and jeans, her hair tied back. No makeup, no noise. Her smile was calm, but her eyes carried a story. She saw Keanu sitting alone, waved gently, and walked over. "Hey," she said softly, taking a seat next to him. "Hey," he replied with his usual half-smile, the kind that said more than words ever could. They were both there for a small charity shoot, a campaign for children who lost their families in recent disasters. But behind that project, something deeper was growing. It wasn't just another donation video. Both Keanu and Sandra were planning something that nobody knew yet. Something real. Something that could change lives quietly, without headlines or cameras. As the crew prepared the lights, a young assistant rushed in with trembling hands, nearly dropping a stack of papers. Keanu instantly stood up, caught them before they fell, and smiled kindly. "Hey, take a breath," he said gently. The girl froze, realizing it was Keanu Reeves talking to her like a normal human. "You're doing great," he added before handing her the papers. Sandra watched that moment. She didn't say a word, but her eyes softened. She'd seen this before, his quiet kindness that never needed an audience. Later, when the cameras started rolling, both of them spoke about hope, about rebuilding lives, about humanity. But their words weren't scripted. They spoke from the heart, every line carrying truth. And when the shoot ended, Sandra leaned closer and whispered, "What if we don't just talk about helping them? What if we actually go there?" Keanu looked at her, confused for a second. "You mean, visit the children ourselves?" She nodded. "Yes, no press, no cameras, just us." He paused, his eyes thoughtful. "That's dangerous and emotional," he said. "But maybe it's the only real way." That night, Keanu couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about the stories he'd heard. Kids sleeping under broken roofs, mothers trying to feed them, families holding on to hope through pain. It reminded him of his own childhood, of loss, of loneliness. He sat by the window looking at the city lights below. He knew what fame had given him, but he also knew what it had taken away, the ability to connect without being seen as a star. The next morning, Sandra called. "I've already arranged it," she said softly. "We'll leave in 2 days. Where?" he asked. "Mexico," she replied. "The earthquake victims' shelter." And just like that, something beautiful began. Not a movie, not a press event, but a quiet journey that would soon touch millions. When they arrived, the air was heavy with dust and heartbreak. Broken walls, scattered toys, and quiet cries filled the space. But there was something else, too, the unbroken spirit of people still holding on. Keanu walked through the camp slowly, his hands in his pockets, eyes filled with emotion. Sandra followed, carrying small bags filled with toys, food, and clothes. A little boy, maybe 7, stood by the edge of a broken wall, staring at them. His shirt was torn, his face dirty, but his eyes bright. Keanu knelt down and smiled. "Hey, buddy, what's your name?" The boy whispered, "Emilio." Keanu took out a small toy car and placed it in his hand. "That's yours now?" Emilio looked at it, then looked up, unsure if it was real. "Thank you," he said softly, almost scared that it might disappear. Sandra came closer, handing him a sandwich. "You're very brave," she said warmly, and then something unexpected happened. The boy ran forward and hugged Keanu's leg tightly. Keanu froze for a moment, his eyes filled with tears he didn't expect. He slowly placed his hand on the boy's head. Sandra watched, her heart breaking and healing at the same time. Later that day, the two of them helped distribute food. They sat with families, listened to stories, shared quiet moments. No one there cared about who they were. They were just kind souls sitting among others, sharing humanity. As night fell, the local lights went out. The camp became dark except for a few candles. Keanu sat under a tree, listening to children singing softly in the dark. Sandra joined him, her eyes glowing in the candlelight. "You feel that?" she whispered. Yeah, he said quietly. Peace. For the first time in a long time, they weren't actors, weren't famous, weren't distant. They were human, raw and real. But the night wasn't over yet. As they were leaving, a volunteer rushed toward them, panicked. The supply truck crashed, he said breathlessly. We lost half the food. Sandra's face turned pale. How far? Just outside the camp. Without a second thought, Keanu grabbed a flashlight. Let's go, he said. They ran through the dirt road in the dark, reaching the overturned truck. The driver was trapped inside. Keanu climbed in through the broken window, ignoring the cuts on his arm, and pulled the man out. Sandra helped carry supplies back to the camp, refusing to stop even when her hands started bleeding. By dawn, the camp was alive again. Food was back, the driver safe, and the children smiling once more. A local reporter arrived later that morning, trying to take pictures. Keanu politely stopped him. Please don't. This isn't about us, he said firmly. The man nodded, realizing this wasn't a story for headlines. It was something sacred. As the sun rose over the camp, Sandra sat beside Keanu, exhausted, her hands trembling. You know, she whispered, this might be the most meaningful thing we've ever done. Keanu looked at her, his voice low. Yeah, and it's just the beginning. Neither of them knew that what they started that night would soon grow into something massive, a global movement of kindness that would unite people across countries, languages and hearts, but for now, all they had was peace, dust on their clothes, and the sound of children laughing again, and in that quiet, they smiled, because they knew that sometimes the smallest act of kindness could light up the darkest place. Whispers of hope. The next morning came with the soft sound of wind brushing against torn tents. Keanu sat on an old wooden bench holding a cup of tea someone had offered him. His eyes looked tired but peaceful. Sandra was helping the volunteers organize new boxes of medicine that had arrived overnight. People moved with quiet purpose. Even in pain, there was hope now, a kind that didn't need words. A small group of children gathered near Keanu. They were drawing in the dirt using broken pencils. He walked closer and sat down with them cross-legged like one of them. What are you drawing? He asked softly. One girl smiled shyly. A house with a roof that doesn't fall. Keanu nodded slowly. That's a good dream, he said. And one day, you'll build it yourself. He picked up a stick and began drawing too. A simple sun with wide rays spreading across the ground. See? Even the sun rises again after the darkest night. The kids smiled, their eyes bright with innocence. Sandra saw this from a distance, her heart swelling with quiet admiration. She always knew Keanu was kind, but seeing him here, barefoot, dusty, talking to children like an old friend, it was something else. It was real. By noon, the heat was strong. Sandra wiped the sweat from her forehead and walked over. You've made some friends, she said, sitting beside him. They're teaching me patience, he said with a faint laugh. She looked at him for a moment, thoughtful. Do you ever wonder, she asked, why we get chances others don't? Why life gave us so much? He took a long pause. Every day, he said quietly. And that's why I think it's our duty to give something back. Her eyes softened. You really mean that? Yeah, he said, looking at the children. Fame doesn't last. Kindness does. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence was full, not empty, not cold, just peaceful. And in that silence, something unspoken grew between them. Not romance, not nostalgia, but a shared purpose. A silent promise that they would keep doing this, not just once, but again and again. But soon, the calm was interrupted by a voice shouting from the road. A man ran into the camp waving a letter in his hand. The government's aid shipment has been delayed, he said breathlessly. They won't arrive for another week. Panic began spreading among the volunteers. Food was already low. Medicine was running out. Sandra immediately stood up. What about nearby villages? She asked. Can we get anything from there? The man shook his head. They're struggling too. Keanu looked at Sandra, determination in his eyes. Then we go ourselves. Keanu, that's too risky, she began. I've done worse, he interrupted gently, a small smile crossing his face. Come on, Sandra. If we can drive a few hours and get something, we have to try. Within the hour, they borrowed an old pickup truck from one of the locals. It looked like it had survived 3 wars, but it ran. They filled it with empty containers, hoping to bring back supplies. The children waved goodbye as they drove off down the dirt road, dust rising behind them. The road stretched through dry land and broken bridges. Sometimes they passed people walking with bundles on their heads, faces tired but still moving forward. Sandra sat quietly, her hands gripping the dashboard. She wasn't scared, she was focused. Every bump in the road reminded her why they were doing this. After a long, rough ride, they reached a small town. The local shopkeeper recognized them instantly.
Are you?
He began, staring. Keanu smiled politely. Yeah, but today we're just people trying to help. The man nodded and led them to a small storage room. Take what you need, he said. No payment, but Keanu shook his head. No, we'll pay. This is your livelihood. He took out his wallet, placed some bills on the counter, and helped carry bags of rice, flour, and medicine to the truck. Sandra joined him, moving quickly. As they loaded the last box, a young mother approached them with tears in her eyes. Please, she said, holding her baby close. We have no milk left. Without a word, Sandra opened a box and handed her 2 packets of baby formula. Take them, she said softly. And take this blanket too. The woman tried to refuse. No, you need it for the others. You are the others, Sandra said gently. We're all the same here. The woman broke down crying and hugged her. Keanu looked at the scene quietly, his jaw tight, eyes glistening. On their way back, the road was even rougher. Thunder began to roll in the distance. The sky darkened and rain started falling hard. The truck's wipers barely worked. They could hardly see the road. Sandra held the steering wheel tightly. We need to stop somewhere, she shouted over the noise. There's an old church nearby, Keanu said, pointing ahead. I saw it when we came through. They drove into the broken yard of the church just as the storm grew wild. Lightning flashed, thunder cracked. Inside, it was dark but dry. They sat down, soaked, catching their breath. For a few minutes, there was silence. Only the sound of rain, you know, Sandra said softly. People will never know about this. No one will ever see what we did. Good, Keanu said with a quiet smile. That's how kindness should be, unseen but felt. She looked at him for a long moment. You really live by that, don't you? I try, he replied. The world doesn't need heroes. It just needs people who care. As the rain eased, they stepped outside. The sky turned golden as the sun broke through the clouds. The road shimmered with light. Keanu placed his hand over his heart and took a deep breath. We'll make it back, he said softly. The kids are waiting. They drove through the golden light, back toward the camp, carrying more than just supplies. They carried hope, quiet, steady, real. When they returned, the children ran toward the truck cheering. Emilio was the first to climb onto the step. You came back, he shouted, eyes bright. Sandra smiled, hugging him tightly. We promised, didn't we? As the volunteers unloaded the supplies, one of them whispered, They saved us. Keanu looked at the sky, almost embarrassed. No, he said softly. We just did what anyone should. But deep inside, both he and Sandra felt something changing. This was no longer just one mission. This was becoming a purpose, one that might carry them far beyond what they had planned. And as night returned to the camp, they sat together again under the stars, watching the children eat and laugh. For the first time in a long time, both of them felt like they belonged. Not in Hollywood, not on a set, but here, among people who reminded them what truly mattered. The ripple of goodness. The days passed quietly after the storm. Sunlight returned to the camp and laughter slowly replaced the cries that once filled the air. Keanu and Sandra stayed longer than they had planned. They could have left once the supplies arrived, but neither of them could. Something deeper was holding them there, something beyond duty. Each morning, Keanu would help rebuild broken shelters with the local volunteers. He worked with bare hands, lifting wood and stone, sweat rolling down his forehead. The people around him kept whispering, He's one of us. He didn't want to be treated as a star, only as a man who cared. Sandra spent her mornings teaching the children letters and songs under a large tree. She wrote on a small board, smiling every time a child shouted the correct answer. Sometimes she laughed so freely that even the older villagers came to watch. It wasn't Hollywood laughter. It was pure, simple, from the heart. One afternoon, as she was teaching, Emilio tugged her sleeve and whispered, "Miss Sandra, will you and Mr. Keanu stay forever?" She looked at his innocent face and smiled gently. "We can't stay forever," she said softly. "But we'll make sure you have everything you need when we go." He frowned. "But you make everyone happy here." Her eyes softened. "You can make people happy too, Emilio. That's the secret. Kindness doesn't need famous people. It needs hearts." Emilio thought about it for a moment, then ran off to share his bread with another boy. Sandra smiled quietly. She realized something. Real change starts when kindness repeats itself through others. Later that evening, Keanu joined her near the fire. The children were sleeping, and only the quiet hum of crickets filled the air. He sat beside her, tired but peaceful. "You've made a school out of nothing," he said with a smile. "And you've made a workshop out of broken walls," she replied. They both laughed softly. Then, out of nowhere, Sandra's tone changed. "Keanu, what if we could make this bigger? Not just this camp, but everywhere. A place that brings people together, helps rebuild lives quietly, without politics, without fame." He looked at her carefully. "Like a foundation?" "Yes," she said, eyes glowing in the firelight. "A kindness foundation. No red carpets, no sponsors, just humans helping humans." Keanu leaned back, thinking. "It's beautiful," he said. "But it'll be hard." "I know," she whispered. "But hard things are usually the ones worth doing." He nodded slowly. "Then let's do it." That night, under a sky full of stars, they made their decision. They would create something called the Silent Hands Project, a movement built not on fame or money, but on the quiet power of compassion. And it would begin here, in this forgotten camp. Over the next few days, they started recording names of local families, listing what they needed most: clean water, education, medical care. Keanu called his personal assistant secretly, asking for logistics help without revealing too much. "Keep it quiet," he said. "No media, no interviews. Just support." Word started spreading slowly, not through newspapers, but through whispers. One person told another, then another. Volunteers began arriving from nearby towns. Small trucks came carrying clothes, books, and even doctors. One evening, an old woman came up to Sandra with tears in her eyes. "Years ago, my son died in an accident," she said softly. "Since then, I stopped believing in good people, but you brought faith back." Sandra held her hand, tears forming in her own eyes. "You brought faith back to us, too." The camp was changing. It was no longer just a shelter. It was becoming a home of hope. People planted small gardens, built wooden benches, painted walls with colors they mixed from mud and ash. Everywhere you looked, there was life returning. But then, one night, something unexpected happened again. A fire broke out in one of the new huts. The dry wind made the flames spread fast. People screamed and ran for water. Keanu didn't think twice. He ran toward the fire, Sandra following behind. They helped pull children out and threw wet blankets over the flames. When it was finally under control, both of them stood there covered in ash, breathing hard. One little girl clung to Sandra's arm, crying. "My drawings, they're gone," she sobbed. Sandra bent down and wiped her tears gently. "You can draw again, sweetheart," she said softly. "This time, even better." Keanu placed his hand on the girl's shoulder. "You still have the most important thing," he said. "What?" she asked. "Your heart," he replied quietly. "And it's stronger than any fire." The next day, when they woke up, something magical had happened. The villagers had gathered around the burnt hut, rebuilding it together. No one waited for orders, no one complained. Even the children helped, carrying small pieces of wood. Kindness had become their strength. Keanu looked around and said softly to Sandra, "This is it. This is what we dreamed of." She nodded, smiling through tears. And it's just starting. Weeks later, when they finally had to leave, the camp was almost unrecognizable. Clean water tanks, new roofs, small gardens, and laughter everywhere. As they walked toward their car, people surrounded them, thanking them, blessing them. Emilio ran up and gave them a small paper heart he had cut himself. Inside, it said in uneven handwriting, "Thank you for giving us hope." Sandra bent down, hugged him, and whispered, "Promise me you'll keep sharing kindness." "I promise," he said firmly. Keanu stood quietly, watching. He didn't trust his voice anymore. Something in him had changed forever. The fame, the movies, the noise, it all felt so small compared to what he saw here. As the car drove away, Sandra looked out the window, tears rolling down her cheeks. "We did something good, didn't we?" she asked softly. Keanu nodded. "Yeah," he whispered. "But the world needs more of it." She turned toward him. "Then let's keep going." "We will," he said. "This is just part one of something much bigger." And as they drove down that dusty road, the sun rose behind them, golden, warm, and full of promise. In that moment, they weren't just actors or celebrities. They were messengers of something pure, a simple truth that would soon move millions. The Movement Awakens weeks passed after Keanu and Sandra left the camp. Back in Los Angeles, life returned to its usual rhythm: lights, cameras, endless interviews. But both of them felt something missing: the silence of the camp, the laughter of children, the raw emotion of people rebuilding. It all stayed in their hearts like an unfinished story. Keanu sat one evening in his apartment, staring at the small paper heart Emilio had given him. It was slightly torn at the edges, but he had framed it carefully. The words, "Thank you for giving us hope," stared back at him every morning. Sometimes he smiled. Sometimes his eyes filled with tears. He knew he couldn't stop there. That camp wasn't an ending. It was a beginning. The next day, he met Sandra at a quiet cafe near the beach. She was already there, sitting by the window, hair tied up, eyes thoughtful. When Keanu walked in, she smiled softly. "I knew you'd call soon," she said. He laughed quietly. "Yeah, I couldn't stop thinking about it." "Me neither," she admitted. The silent hands project. "We started something. People from Mexico are still sending letters. Some want to volunteer. Others want to donate. It's growing faster than we imagined." He leaned forward. "Then we have to guide it. Before it becomes another charity with names and faces, it has to stay what it is: pure, quiet kindness." Sandra nodded. "No fame, no red carpets. Only hearts." They spent hours sketching ideas on paper napkins. Small community projects, direct help to families, schools, hospitals, all done anonymously. They would build teams across countries, connecting volunteers quietly under the name the Silent Hands Project. But to do that, they needed trust. They needed people who believed in giving without expecting anything back. The next few weeks were filled with planning. Keanu sold one of his motorcycles to fund the first batch of school kits. Sandra used her film contacts to find doctors and teachers willing to join without publicity. Soon, a tiny group of volunteers began traveling to remote areas under their guidance. And just as before, they avoided cameras, press, or sponsors. Their only rule was simple: help, then disappear. But destiny has a way of revealing even the quietest good deeds. One afternoon, a small video went viral online, a short clip filmed by a child in Mexico. It showed Keanu and Sandra helping rebuild a shelter covered in dust, smiling like ordinary people. The caption read, "They came. They helped. They left without saying a word." In less than 24 hours, it spread across the world. Millions of people shared it. News outlets tried to contact them, but neither of them replied. Instead, Keanu posted a short message on his social account. "Kindness doesn't need a camera. But if this video inspires someone to help another person, let it spread." The internet exploded. Hashtags began trending. Das silent hands, das kindness without noise, be humankind. People everywhere started doing small acts of compassion, buying food for strangers, helping rebuild homes, planting trees, visiting orphanages. Sandra sat in her living room one night, scrolling through the stories people were posting. Teachers building schools, students donating meals, communities uniting. She whispered to herself, "It's happening." The Silent Hands project had become a movement, not owned by anyone, not branded, not controlled. Just kindness spreading quietly like wind. But behind all the joy, a new challenge was waiting. One evening, Keanu received a call from a volunteer in India. "Sir," the man said, his voice trembling, "the floods have destroyed everything in our village. People are trapped. We need help." Keanu immediately called Sandra. "We can't stay silent this time," he said. "This is big." Within days, they flew to India, arriving in a small flooded town. The air was thick with humidity, the streets filled with water and broken debris. Families stood on rooftops, waving weakly for help. Keanu waded through waist-deep water, helping pull people into boats. Sandra carried children in her arms, covering them with plastic sheets. The situation was worse than anything they had seen before. They worked without rest for 2 days straight. Food was scarce and exhaustion was real, but no one complained. Every act of help gave them more strength. On the third night, Sandra sat by a campfire, soaked and tired. She looked at Keanu, who was bandaging an old man's foot. "We can't be everywhere," she said softly. "The world is full of pain. Sometimes I feel so small." Keanu looked at her, his face lit by the fire. "You're right," he said quietly. "We can't change the whole world, but we can change the world for someone. That's enough." Her eyes welled up. "That's what makes it worth it," she whispered. By morning, more volunteers arrived, not from their team, but locals inspired by what they saw. Fishermen, students, old farmers, all helping together. Word spread again, and soon, people from other cities sent boats and supplies. Sandra watched as strangers worked hand in hand and whispered, This is the power of kindness. It multiplies." By the end of the week, the town began recovering. People started rebuilding, children played again, and hope returned. When they were preparing to leave, a young girl handed Sandra a small hand-drawn picture, 2 hands lifting a heart. "This is your sign," the girl said softly. Sandra smiled, tears falling silently. She showed it to Keanu, who nodded. "It's more than a sign," he said. "It's our mission." Back in Los Angeles, they decided to make it official, not as celebrities, but as founders of a nameless kindness movement. No office, no titles, no press, and only action. They built an online space where anyone could share stories of silent goodness. No names, no faces, just hearts helping hearts. And soon, something extraordinary happened. People from Africa, Japan, Brazil, Pakistan, and Europe started posting. "Silent hands helped us. We rebuilt together. We found kindness again." The world was changing, slowly, quietly, beautifully. And yet in their hearts, Keanu and Sandra both knew that this light wouldn't come without shadows. Because where kindness grows, challenges follow. Powerful people, corporations, and critics were starting to question their intentions. But neither of them knew that the real test of their mission was just around the corner, one that would challenge their trust, their strength, and their faith in humanity itself. The storm of doubt, the world was beginning to change. News feeds overflowed with stories of kindness. Strangers helped strangers. Families in one country sent food to families in another. Children started writing "Be kind first" on their school walls. It felt like the planet was breathing hope again. But not everyone saw it that way. In the shadows of success, criticism began to grow. Journalists questioned the Silent Hands project. Influencers called it a publicity stunt. Some claimed it was a secret marketing campaign. Others said, "There's no way actors do this without profit." Keanu read those headlines quietly one morning, sitting by his window. Keanu Reeves and Sandra Bullock's kindness project? Too good to be true? He sighed, closed the laptop, and rubbed his eyes. It hurt, not because of the lies, but because he knew how fragile faith could be. One rumor could destroy what took months of compassion to build. A few hours later, his phone buzzed. It was Sandra. "You've seen it, haven't you?" Her voice sounded heavy. "Yeah," he said softly. "They're trying to turn something pure into something cheap." People love drama more than truth, she said quietly. But we can't fight noise with anger. We fight it with actions. He nodded. Then let's remind them what this really means. That week, they flew to a small town in Africa where drought had taken away everything. No water. No crops. No hope. The locals had heard of silent hands through whispers, and when Keanu and Sandra arrived, people gathered silently, not to take photos, not to ask for autographs, but to hold hands. Keanu stepped forward, his eyes scanning the crowd. "We're not here to save anyone," he said gently. "We're here to stand with you." A local elder, his face marked by time, smiled faintly. "You came when others didn't," he said. "That's what matters." Together with volunteers, they dug wells, built water tanks, and taught children how to purify water using sunlight. Every evening, Sandra would sit under a tree surrounded by kids, telling them stories about kindness, not fairy tales, but real stories of humans helping humans. As the sun set, the villagers sang songs of hope, voices rising into the sky like a prayer. But while they were there, one evening a drone hovered above them, filming without permission. A week later, a video surfaced online titled "Truth Behind Keanu and Sandra's Kindness Empire." It twisted facts, showing selective clips and false claims. It accused them of using charity money for travel. The internet turned harsh overnight. Hate comments flooded in. Fake heroes. Pretending to care. All for fame. Sandra broke down that night. She sat by the tent, hands shaking. "We don't deserve this," she whispered. "We've done everything right." Keanu sat beside her, silent for a long moment. Then he said softly, "Truth doesn't shout, Sandra. It survives quietly, like we do." She looked at him, eyes filled with tears. "But how do we make them see the truth?" "We don't," he said calmly. "We keep doing what's right. People will feel it eventually." Days passed. They kept working despite the noise. They stopped checking the internet. Instead, they focused on faces, on hands holding cups of clean water, on children laughing as rain finally fell one morning. The first drops hit the dry soil like blessings. Everyone danced. Sandra lifted her face to the sky, laughing through tears. "This is it," she said. "This is the truth." Keanu smiled faintly. "And no headline can take this away." Back in Los Angeles, however, things were getting worse. Brands began pulling donations. Even friends grew distant, afraid of the controversy. Reporters followed them everywhere. One evening, as Keanu stepped out of his car, a journalist shouted, "Mr. Reeves, is the Silent Hands Project fake?" He turned, calm as always, and said, "The only thing fake is how easily we forget kindness when noise gets louder." Then he walked away. The clip went viral again, but this time it hit differently. People began defending them. Hundreds of volunteers who had seen them working came forward, posting real footage, stories, and photos. Soon, the narrative began to change. Hashtags shifted. Truth of kindness. Silent is real. Stand with Keanu and Sandra. The world saw through the lies. Slowly, light replaced the darkness. One afternoon, an email arrived. It was from the little boy Emilio. He had grown since the earthquake. He wrote in simple words, "Dear Mr. Keanu and Miss Sandra, don't be sad. The people who know you don't need proof. I built a small class under the same tree where we met. I tell the children what you told me. Be kind even when nobody is watching." Sandra read it aloud, her voice breaking. Keanu smiled through tears. "That's it," he said quietly. "That's all the proof we'll ever need." They decided to return to Mexico to visit Emilio. When they arrived, they saw something that left them speechless. Under the same old tree, there was now a small wooden sign that read, "The Silent Classroom." Dozens of children sat on the ground, learning letters and songs. Emilio stood in front, teaching. His voice was confident, his smile bright. When he saw them, he ran forward, hugging them both tightly. "You see?" he said proudly. "The world didn't forget kindness." Keanu knelt down, placing his hand on the boy's shoulder. "You've done something beautiful," he whispered. Sandra looked around. The villagers had painted the words "Hope Lives" here on a wall nearby. She smiled softly. "I think the world just needed a reminder." As they sat there, watching the children laugh, a gentle breeze passed through the camp. the same kind that once carried despair, now carrying hope. Sandra turned to Keanu. "Do you think people will keep this going even after we're gone?" He looked at her with quiet conviction. "They already are. Kindness spreads faster than we think. It just needs a spark." And as the sun dipped behind the mountains, the sky turned orange and gold. In that fading light, they both understood. No storm, no rumor, no hate could ever destroy what was built on love, because real kindness didn't need protection. It only needed people brave enough to keep it alive. The light that never fades. Months passed since the storm of doubt faded. The world had calmed again. People were slowly learning to look beyond noise, beyond headlines, beyond fame. The Silent Hands Project had become more than a movement now. It had become a heartbeat shared by millions. From tiny villages to giant cities, people had begun building small kindness hubs, all inspired by what Keanu and Sandra had started. But for them, it was never about numbers, never about global reach. It was about one truth: hearts helping hearts. Keanu lived quietly in a small house away from Hollywood lights. No posters, no awards on the walls, only a few photographs: the camp in Mexico, the children in India, the laughter in Africa. He woke early, cooked his own meals, and spent hours writing letters to volunteers across the world. He never signed them with his name. Each letter ended the same way: keep the kindness alive. Stay silent. Stay strong. Sandra, meanwhile, worked on new films again, but something in her had changed too. She refused glamorous roles. Instead, she chose stories about humanity, loss, and love. During interviews, she never mentioned her project directly. Instead, she would say softly, "Kindness doesn't need faces. It needs believers." Then one morning, while Sandra was on set, she received a call from Keanu's assistant. His voice was calm but low. "Miss Bullock, he's in the hospital." Her heart dropped. "What happened?" "He collapsed during a volunteer trip. Exhaustion, the doctors say." She rushed to him that evening. The hospital room was quiet. Keanu lay there, pale but peaceful, an IV in his arm. Sunlight from the window touched his face. He smiled weakly when he saw her. "You always show up at the right time," he whispered. "And you always forget to rest," she replied, her voice shaking. He laughed softly. "Guess I still don't know how to stop." She sat beside him, holding his hand gently. "You've done enough, Keanu. You've given more than anyone could." He looked at her with tired eyes, but a gentle smile. "You don't understand. Kindness isn't something you give once. It's something you live with, every breath, every moment." A tear slipped down her cheek. "You can still live it, but slower this time." He smiled faintly. "Maybe, but promise me something." "Anything," she whispered. "Don't let the movement die." "Not for me. Not for anyone. It's not ours anymore, Sandra. It belongs to the world now." She squeezed his hand. "I promise." A few days later, Keanu recovered enough to leave the hospital. But he didn't go back to Los Angeles. Instead, he went to Mexico again to see Emilio and the children. Sandra joined him. When they arrived, the whole village gathered to welcome them. There were new homes, new gardens, new smiles. The old broken shelter had been turned into a school, its walls painted with bright colors. On one wall, in large letters, were the words, "Kindness built this." Keanu stood there silently, eyes glistening. Sandra placed her hand on his shoulder. "You see what you started?" He shook his head gently. "What we started." The children ran up, surrounding them, laughing and holding flowers. Emilio, now a teenager, handed Keanu a notebook. Inside were hundreds of messages from people who had visited the village to volunteer. They had all written one sentence: "I came to help, but I left healed." Keanu closed the book, holding it close to his chest. "That's the real magic," he said quietly. "We think we're saving others, but they're the ones saving us." As the sun began to set, everyone gathered around the old tree, the same tree where it had all begun years ago. Sandra looked at Keanu and smiled. "Do you think the world will remember this?" He looked out at the glowing horizon. "Maybe not our names," he said softly, "but they'll remember the feeling. And that's enough." That night, the villagers sang songs around the fire. Keanu and Sandra sat side by side, watching the flames dance, listening to laughter that carried through the night. It wasn't a farewell. It was peace. Weeks later, Keanu returned home quietly, still writing letters, still sending silent help to places that needed it. And then, one morning, the news came. He had passed away in his sleep, peacefully. Without pain, the world fell silent. Social media flooded with stories, memories, and unseen photos of his kindness, the meals he shared with homeless people, the children he helped educate, the quiet moments he never let the cameras see. Sandra didn't speak for days. She stayed alone, looking through old pictures, reading his letters. One line in his handwriting stood out to her: "If one heart still chooses kindness after I'm gone, then I'm still here." She read it over and over, tears running down her face. A month later, she appeared at a small event. No stage, no spotlights, just people gathered in a park holding candles. She stood before them, her voice calm but strong. Keanu believed that kindness should be silent. But tonight, let's let it speak, not in words, but in actions. Help someone tomorrow, feed a stranger, forgive someone. That's how he wanted to live on. From that night, the Silent Hands project changed forever. People began calling it Keanu's Light, not as a brand, but as a promise. A year later, the foundation had reached 40 countries. Schools, hospitals, and homes were being built in his memory. Every door carried a small symbol, 2 hands holding a heart. No signatures, no fame, only love. Sandra often visited those places quietly. She never stayed long. She would sit, talk to children, smile, and leave a note behind that said only one thing: keep the kindness alive. And wherever she went, people would whisper stories about a man who gave without asking, a woman who believed without doubt, and a movement that turned silence into hope. Years passed. The world moved on, but Keanu's light never dimmed. It lived in every act of compassion, every stranger who chose to care. Every child who learned that kindness is the strongest language in the world. One evening, as the sun set over the ocean, Sandra sat alone on a wooden bench. In her hands was that same small paper heart Emilio had given them long ago. She smiled through tears and whispered, "You did it, Keanu. The world is kinder now. The waves move softly, the horizon glowing gold." And in that moment it felt like he was still there, watching, smiling, at peace.